the contract vendor, what their interest is an entitlement to a stream of payments. So it's whether it's 240 payments of $694 a month, or it's annual payments of 25,000 or whatever it is, you're entitled to a stream of payments as a seller. This usually allows the seller to earn a good rate of return on their money because they have money laid out there, they're earning interest. It's higher than you can get from a savings account or government bonds or any other comparable investments out there. We tend to think that contracts are substitutable for equities, like in the stock market or higher yield bonds. They tend to have, we see the same rate of return and the same kind of performance. Once the seller sells on contract, their judgment liens stop attaching. Because those liens no longer attach to the property because the seller no longer owns the property. Now the buyer owns the property. So that is a little bit of protection for the buyer there. No longer responsible for things like property maintenance, repairs, special assessments, that sort of thing. In the end, you could be responsible for some things like city notices on junk and debris and that kind of thing, but it is transfer of the property is the key point here. But what it makes contracts so powerful and interesting is that the vendor interest in this contract, and indeed the vendee interest, is transferable. You can move it from person to person without affecting the ownership of the underlying real estate. So I can sell property on contract to you, and then I can transfer my interest to Contract Exchange Corporation, but you still own the property. And it doesn't change anything as far as the buyer is concerned. That sale still happens.
Similar to when your lender sells your mortgage and you get you got to pay these guys now. And that's kind of what we do when we buy these contracts is we're just another bank that got your loan. So you just pay a new guy.
Right. So that would be a good way to think of Contract Exchange Corporation is we're kind of like the secondary market for contracts, and where those things can be, sold and bought. So for the buyer, they are called the contract vendee, or also called the equitable title holder. What does this allow them to do? It allows them to sell the property, allows them to refinance the property. They can even mortgage the property. They can mortgage their now, beyond what I meant by refinance, like refinance the contract, get a mortgage, get the deed, pay it all off. You can actually technically mortgage your vendee interest. Not saying it happens a lot, but they do have the legal right to do that. They can renovate the property. Of course, they can rent the property. So they are the sole, they control and own the property. Call them the equitable title holders because they get the value of the equity and up to and including appreciation. So when you sell on contract, it's a fixed point in time. It is a sale. There's a price involved. The buyer never really owes more than what the balance of that contract is. The property can't be sold again by the title holder. So if they put their money into it and fix it up, and then values, meanwhile, are going up by 5-6% a year, then they get the benefit of that. That accumulates on their side. They also get homestead credits, mortgage interest deductions, homeowners insurance, that kind of, those things they get to put into place because they are categorically the homeowner, so they get the benefit of those things as well.
A lot of sellers will ask, like, if they try to keep their own insurance policy on the house at the time. That's not really necessary. The buyer is supposed to keep the insurance, and the seller should be named on that insurance policy. But a lot of times I see them double up on insurance, and it's just not necessary.
Yeah, or the seller just keeps their insurance policy in place and charges them, when it really contract says it should be in the name of the buyer. So why do people choose to buy on contract? So these are some of the typical things you might hear as to why people might look to purchase on contract. They have foreclosure in the recent past, bankruptcy, no or low credit people who just traditionally use cash to buy things. They don't use a lot of credit, but then when it comes time to buy a house, it's hard to gather up $110,000. So this may be an avenue for them. Recent divorces and that impact on credit, job and income change, identity theft, ITIN versus socials. Everybody familiar with, ITINs versus socials? And there aren't a lot of loan products out there from traditional lenders for people with an ITIN. There are some, but it is something that is easier for a contract seller or a contract vendor to make happen. Last point is really compared to rentals. With rent the way it is and interest rates the way they are, it makes these payments not so dissimilar to a rental payment in terms of cost per month. So for about the same monthly, somebody can own the property versus rent the property. So that's a big driver that we see. A lot of people, are calling like, well, I'm sick and tired of spending, $12,000 a year on giving it to somebody else when I could have something that's mine.
If you are dealing with an investor or you have a buyer that can't finance yet, and this commonplace that lenders will say, just get into a contract for a year and we'll refinance you. Well, that really doesn't help us. We can't make a commission off of that. But what I have seen some agents do is, in that case, they'll help orchestrate the contract sale between the landlord or the investor or the buyer that they have that can't get traditional financing, and you can hold back your commission until the refinance. And I've heard of agents just saying, 4 or 5 years ago, I sold a bunch on contract and now they're refinancing and I'm just getting paid for doing nothing. It feels like free money. So it's just an idea of how you can be creative with it.
Yeah.
Does owning a home on contract, does that build credit for somebody that maybe would buy without any credit?
Yeah, it's something that we specifically are working on in terms, like this year, I hope to get it done to actually start reporting to the credit bureaus. But in another way, yes, it does, because they do own that on those BOM forms that the lenders will send over. There's a box that says, is it rent, is it mortgage, is it land contract? And so the land contract counts as, they have that equity, and the sellers say they've made X number of on-time payments, and does allow them or show their credit worthiness in another way that a lender can take into account. So as far as directly building a credit score, it depends on if you have somebody like us involved who has got to that level where we are reporting to the bureaus, but just kind of a private sale between two people. Probably not building their credit score, but it is building equity and credit worthiness. Another reason why people buy on contract that we kind of touched on in the beginning is for investors to get involved in, income properties with a lower down payment or kind of without bank financing. We have a few people who borrow from us just as like kind of an auxiliary line of credit. So, one guy's doing a lot of stuff and then he kind of gets full up on his bank line. He'll switch something over to a contract with us in order to free up his bank line and keep going to the next deal. So there's a lot of different ways that you can use it. Another example of reasons someone would buy on contract is in the case of estates. And there is a situation where an heir wants to buy the house. They don't have a house, and that's generally the case in these situations. You got two heirs that are, they have their own houses, and then there's one heir who would really like to own a house, but for one reason or another doesn't qualify for financing. We have in the past, and this has been very successful with it, used that heir's equity in that property as an heir, as their down payment, and kind of set it up as a contract sale between the estate and the heir. And so we can cash out the other two and the third gets the house. So that's something to be thinking about in those situations where it's like, oh, Freddie would really like to buy grandma's house, but, you know, maybe consider a contract. So a little bit about the Iowa bar form contract and contract law in Iowa. General disclosure, I'm not an attorney. The Iowa bar form contract law tends to favor the seller. It's a very favorable for sellers in this state. Primarily because of Chapter 656. This is 30-day forfeiture. It's a non-judicial process. It's actually the same process you would use to forfeit out any of your purchase agreements if you ever found a need to do that on your more traditional sales. This is by far the riskiest aspect of the whole thing for the buyer, because if they fall behind, then all that happens is they're served a notice of forfeiture, and then they have 30 days to pay what you owe. So it's not an acceleration of the debt. It's only pay what you are behind. So if you're behind 2 payments and you get served that notice, then you have 30 days to pay that amount. But it is a quick process, it's non-judicial process, so it can be difficult for a buyer. That's why we believe it's so important for there to be someone who is looking out for the buyers and evaluating their ability to make these payments and looking at all their total debts and all their total financial picture and say, does this make sense, or are we kind of just setting them up to fail here? So that's an important thing to think about when considering if you have a contract buyer.
What would happen if the buyer is not able to perform on those payments? What's the next step?
Then the affidavit is filed, an affidavit in support of forfeiture is filed, and the contract's gone. All the money down, all the money payments they paid, it's all gone. So it does happen quickly. So
The seller or the buyer is treated as a tenant without a lease.
right, tenant holder.
According to the law, then he can just be removed from the property. They lose their down payment, they lose all the payments they paid.
By a sheriff or?
Yeah, it could eventually go to a sheriff, yeah. You go to court, the judge rules that the contract is void, the tenant has no right to be here, so they have to leave.
That being said, you can always, there are situations where contracts get reinstated. We do that occasionally after, we get so far down the line and it's like, well, you had to publish on you, where were you?
Yeah. Sometimes it's not until you're in the eviction hearing and they're like, well, I can pay you tomorrow. You're like, well, the contract's technically gone. We'll have to reinstate the contract if you do X, Y, and Z. And that's a lot of times what we do if we do end up in those eviction hearings is we create a stipulated eviction FED and say, if you pay X by Y, we will reinstate your contract. But technically, they don't have one at that point.
Another favorable aspect of the bar form contract is it allows the seller to mortgage the property. So being the title holder, you can still grant a mortgage and you can still give an assignment of contract, kind of like an assignment of rents to a lender. And that acts, the vendor interest in the contract, you're being the title holder, acts as your collateral. And you, generally speaking, there's a blank spot there on the Iowa bar form, so you can write in whatever percentage you want. But generally speaking, sellers can usually mortgage up to 100% of the contract balance. So that goes back to what we were saying before, that the sale is a fixed point in time. It is a definite marker of what is owed from this person to this person. And the seller can never borrow more than what the contract vendee owes them. And there is a little bit of protection in here for the buyer. In certain situations, the buyer is obviously entitled to know about any liens. There's seller contract disclosure law on the books in Iowa that you have to tell the buyer about any mortgages you have on the property at the get-go, from the beginning. And in certain situations, if you have a buyer who has this contract balance and this is heading downwards, and seller has this contract balance or mortgage balance is heading downwards, and these balances cross or meet, then the buyer can actually start paying the seller's mortgage just to be sure that it's getting paid, and can actually assume that mortgage, which is why there's so many due on sale clauses now, and pay. And at that point, the seller has basically got everything they can possibly get out of the property.
So in regards to what you just said is mortgages, you said the seller can mortgage up to 100% of the contract balance. He's talking after the sale, the contract sale. Most mortgages that are in existence right now have what's called a due on sale clause. When you sell your property, you have to pay off the mortgage, obviously. And I don't know if you're going to go through this later, but you can sell it. You can go around that due on sale clause if you have permission from the bank, or you have some. I would most definitely get something in writing. But he's talking about mortgaging the property after the contract sale. So I sold this property on contract. I own nothing. I can go to the bank and say, hey, can I borrow, $50,000? This guy owes me 75, and they'll do it. But anytime you owe money against the property, you have to disclose that to the buyer, before or after.
Right.
And as far as the liens are concerned as well, we said earlier is liens. If I sell my property and I have a lien on it, that buyer's going to inherit my lien. But after that sale, if I get a lien against me, that will not attach to the property. So there's just before or after that contract sale is kind of pivotal to what we're talking about here.
Mm-hmm.
But most sellers have a due on sale in their mortgages.
Correct.
So they're not gonna be able to sell on contract without selling the contract to us and paying off their mortgage.
So that's-
Most of the mortgages, the conventional mortgages, the VA mortgage, the FHA mortgages, all have that in there. So if you're dealing with a seller or listing and want to suggest contract, they're gonna probably have to get rid of that mortgage to be able to sell it on contract. In 90% of the time.
So if the seller mortgages the property for $50,000 when their contract buyer owes them $75,000, if the seller defaults on that $50,000 loan, then what's the bank gonna do?
Typically, if that mortgage is granted after the contract sale, the bank will issue a subordination agreement to the contract buyer. The buyer will know that mortgage is there, and but they subordinate their interest to the bank. So the bank's ahead of them in that case, and they can blow off the contract.
Yeah, they're serving them as part of a foreclosure process. So they're saying, hey, this is what's happening. So it is not a good, that's also not a great situation for the buyer. No,
Yeah.
and we've rescued many situations there that have come across our desk where seller stops paying the mortgage, and or they had a due on sale clause and they didn't tell them, and now the bank wants their money. So in those situations, and where we're kind of leading with this is you need a way to turn those contracts into cash. And that's what contract exchange does, is we are able to step in and go, okay, I'll buy that contract from you and pay off that mortgage, halt that foreclosure proceeding, and then the original deal with the buyer still remains. The buyer maintains ownership and control of the property. We're very big on people being able to preserve their equity at contract exchange. We think that that's an important aspect of community lending, of citizen finance, which is kind of what we're doing. But that is something that's important for buyers to know. Is there a mortgage on the property? And then maybe every year or every couple months, depending on who's the seller, check in.
Servicing.
Right, and correct.
Servicing is important. We service contracts for other sellers. So if we do set up a servicing, we want to know if that seller's got a mortgage. We want that payment being paid. Every time that buyer pays a payment, we're making that guy's mortgage payment. So that there's none of this going on. There was a guy 10 years ago who did this consistently in Des Moines. His name is Wolford, and he's in jail. But he defrauded, I don't know, maybe $100. I don't know. He did ruin titles. Would tell sellers that he would take care of their mortgage and then sell it on contract and not pay the payments. Had no intention of paying payments. Created big messes for all these poor buyers that dealt with this guy. So if you're dealing with a buyer, if you're a buyer's agent and you're starting into a contract, I would strongly recommend that you call a contract exchange and say, hey, I got this buyer. Would you at least service it if we can negotiate this deal with this seller? And then, as a buyer, I would just insist that it be serviced professionally, because we are examined by the bank examiners. They look at how we service. They look at all the notices we have to give, and that we're doing everything fairly to the buyer. It's all about consumer protection. It's the buyer's protection that we are licensed to protect. And a Joe seller, you don't know if he knows how to calculate the interest rate. We've seen guys charging late charges that are just ridiculously onerous and not even in the contract, and milking people for hundreds and hundreds of dollars in late charges and other phony baloney stuff, that you want to protect your buyer from those kind of folks. Unfortunately, they're out there.
Yeah, so going back to the bar form contract, it is a good contract. If you get a chance, look it over, and familiarize yourself with what it looks like, and kind of what the clauses are. You see a lot of what happens and why contracts will get a bad name is they get a bad name by association, or because somebody goes, so-and-so bought their house on contract and they got ripped off, they never owned the property or whatever. And we just saw this in the last couple of years. And they say, they bought their house on contract. And then we saw the contract, and it's literally a handwritten thing on a piece of paper that says 40,000 down, you owe me 20,000, $500 a month. And then someone stuck their notary stamp on it and they recorded it. But they didn't even record that. So that's not a contract. That's just ripping people off. So it's good to know kind of what the actual bar form legal contract looks like.
Yeah, that's something to tell your buyers if they call and they're like, I want to buy something on contract. They have a big down payment. Just say, be careful and make sure you deal with professionals, because there are people still doing business out there right now that are just ripping people off. So, I tell people that, I said, there are people that I wouldn't touch with a 10-foot pole. Even if you don't use us, you can have us look at something. If you're dealing with a contract or putting something together, just say, hey, will you just look at this and make sure this is, looks legitimate? We'd be happy to, because even if eventually that contract may come back to us,
Okay, continuing the laws that actually relate to contract sales. There's a lot of them now, especially after 2014. Land installment contracts in the Dodd-Frank bill got grouped into this category of federally related mortgages. I know it sounds odd because they're not mortgages, but they do count in that group. So there's a whole section of code and stuff that applies to contracts that you wouldn't actually think applies to contracts, because they're saying mortgages all the time. So just, laundry list, you can run through them: Dodd-Frank, the Truth in Lending Act, Real Estate Settlement Procedures Act, which I'm sure you guys are all familiar with, Equal Credit Opportunity Act, Fair Housing Act. In Iowa, we have Iowa Code 535B, and then any rulemaking from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau on these issues also would apply. So the big thing in 2014, what happened is that the Dodd-Frank Financial Reform Bill passed. That kind of prompted Contract Exchange to become a licensed mortgage banker. for me to become a licensed loan originator and to kind of make sure that we're following aspects of this regulation that apply to us. So I'm just going to go through these three that is going to concern you as a real estate agent. The loan originator rule kind of says who is a loan originator, who is not a loan originator, what you have to do if you are a loan originator. You can, as a seller, someone can do up to 3 contracts per year without being considered a loan originator or having to use a licensed loan originator. That is, there's some wiggle room there on what kind of terms you can offer. I mean, if you offer a balloon, then you can only do 1 a year. Then that's it, you're done. But if you're laying out financing for 15 or 20 years, you can do up to 3. Truth in Lending Act, pretty broad, old act that concerns disclosures that have to be made in terms of an extension of credit. And that is what a contract is. It is an extension of credit from the seller to the buyer. There's an interest rate, there's a balance, there's monthly payments. So truth in lending does apply, but the key here is you can't do more than 5 per year, otherwise you become a creditor and a whole bunch of other stuff applies. And it would require licensure. But most importantly, if somebody is going to do a contract sale under the Dodd-Frank bill, you need to evaluate somebody's ability to repay. Even if you're only doing 3 or you're only doing 1. Your seller's like, okay, I'll do a contract on this property. That seller has a legal obligation to evaluate the buyer's credit and these 8 other factors that go under the ability to repay rule. You have to evaluate, the seller is supposed to evaluate and document those things. So you basically have to do everything that you're going to do anyway. So that's where someone like Contract Exchange can be valuable to a seller who wants to hold a contract and say, I think this is a good investment. I think I'm going to hold this contract. We do have an origination service so that we can do the underwriting, we do the interview, the early disclosures, coordinate the closing, put a CD together, and guide the buyer through that whole process and make sure that we do have documentation and say, yes, this buyer can afford this payment.
What is the bare minimum? Should they not use contract? What's the bare minimum that the seller would have to do in order to be considered saying that they are evaluated?
You have to pull credit. Sometimes people won't even pull credit. You do have to evaluate their credit history. You need to document and verify employment and income, document and verify other obligations that they may have, including child support or alimony or anything like that. If there's going to be multiple loans against the property, you need to evaluate that. A lot of them are semi-redundant and basically fall under the whole. It's basically you need to look at and document the buyer's financial picture. Their assets, their liabilities. Do they have enough money coming in to afford the payment? You're looking at what's called your front end ratio, the ratio of the housing payment to their gross income, and then look at their debt to income, all debts to their gross income, just like a loan originator would.
So bare minimum, they have to pull credit and check, verify income and employment, kind of compare the two, make sure they can afford the payment.
Right.
So any sellers that you have, especially tell them that, because if they do not do that, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, if a buyer has a problem with, whatever you did contract wise, when they make a complaint, what happens?
Well, a lot of this is still being worked through, but the rule would be it's senior knows it well because it's kept him up at night. But
Well, the penalty that you'd have to pay for the buyer's lawyer, and the penalty could be up to 3 years interest, no interest for 3 years.
3 years, no interest, refunding of all the fees and all that. So it basically, it would blow your position to smithereens and you lose a bunch of money. So it's just better to, you get like a home warranty. Home warranty makes the buyer and seller feel good, right? Because it's, here, that way if something goes wrong, I don't have to deal with it. I'm offering a home warranty, paying for home warranty. Buyer feels good. They know if something goes wrong, don't have to deal with it. That's why we kind of recommend use contract exchange. We're here. We provide a service. We'll create a file and document this stuff for a seller so that, maybe some more sellers can sell their properties. Whereas before they may just kind of be unable to sell. And these listings that are kind of locked up because they can't get they couldn't sell to a traditional buyer. Maybe they need to sell on contract and get some money for that. Iowa Code 535B, mention that because we're in Iowa here. This is what regulates Contract Exchange Corporation. This is actually a little interesting. You can't originate more than 4 per year without a license. But that seems contradictory to the federal law because it is. But you cannot service more than 4 without a license, which is kind of a big deal when you consider that there are some people out there who are servicing 40, 50 contracts when the law is saying that you really can't service more than 4. And so what that is taking in the payments, processing payments, and all that. So, roundabout way we got there. How can CEC help this situation? Contract exchange does a lot of things. We try to work in a lot of different ways. So we have our inventory of properties that we make available for buyers to purchase on contract. So that's properties that we've purchased and rehabbed and fixed up, or perhaps that an investor had to take back through a repo process. But those are properties that are available to purchase on contract. We can finance buyers on a purchase of a property. This we call our conventional contract program, and we're going to go through that a little bit more. We can buy out a contract from the seller at closing. This is called our seller paid discount. We're going to talk about that. And then cash cow contracts, sellers in pre-existing contracts. So a lot of this is how the business started, and what it drove it for many years is people sold on contract and they've been sitting around. The buyer said, "Oh, I'll have my credit fixed in 3 years, and then I can pay off." And then 5 years later, it's, well, okay, they're still not got their credit fixed and they still need to buy this on contract. So I just need some money now and get done with it. And then also what we've been touching on, refinancing pre-existing contracts, people who still can't get a mortgage, we can step in there and pay it off entirely, put them in a brand new contract. And then I think our servicing and origination services as well. So, conventional contract program, this is kind of like your green postcard that you got there. This is our, basically your mass market program that you could use with a buyer. We get them pre-approved. They talk to me, they get a pre-approval letter from me based on being able to buy a property with 20% down. So it's a little more traditional level of down payment, kind of back to the George Bailey days. 20% down, you're able to buy a house. This allows you to have the buyer be able to purchase any property that's on the market, even almost any property.
It won't work with foreclosures because you have to do the paperwork in a slightly different way, and the banks don't want to or won't understand it.
So excluding foreclosures, but even, Even if it's a foreclosure and the buyer really loves it and they want to do it.
We can do it.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
can do it. It's just, we don't, yeah, it's a little more difficult. But it goes together just like any normal transaction. It should not be treated, except for a little bit of change in the paperwork and the transfer documents. It shouldn't be treated as, some second-rate offer or second-rate transaction. It's the same as anybody else's financing. That's why we call it conventional financing. So there is a contract sale from the seller to the buyer. Money down goes to the seller. Deed from the seller then goes to Contract Exchange Corporation. The recording information from the contract will flow onto that deed, and that gets recorded and transfers their vendor interest to Contract Exchange. The seller has no more obligation to the property. So all at the same time, there's only one closing statement. It all goes together like a normal transaction. You guys get your commissions, abstracting, all this gets done, all your normal inspections and all that. So I'll say it again, it looks exactly like a normal transaction.
We even put, I guess we're gonna go through writing the offer, but we put in there conventional contract, just so we're not trying to trick the listing agent that it's conventional financing, 20% down. We want them associating with a conventional loan a little bit more, thinking that it's a more stronger buyer. I mean, they are strong, they got 20% down,
Is 20%.
For that program, yeah, because what happens is in that program, there's no discount to the seller. We have 3,000 closing costs and that's our fee in those transactions. So you have to ask for closing costs, but that's the seller's getting all their money. We're buying their note at closing for face value. We set the terms, we qualify the buyer, and we're ending up holding the bag with those guys. But really, our fees, the 3,000 closing costs, and it's the seller's getting all of their money
So
on
you
that
have a
sale.
separate agreement with the buyer that we don't have to worry about.
Well, it's just like a traditional lender. We have them approved, and this is what your costs are, your loan costs, and this is what you're getting and
So
whatsoever.
they're signing some kind of note with closing or something.
Right, well, they're signing the contract. So so this contract comes first between your same buyer, same seller. And that happens, and then how it goes down is that contract gets recorded, then the recorder takes that information, puts it on the warranty deed, and then the warranty deed gets filed right after it, and that moves the vendor interest over to Contract Exchange Corporation.
When we do present these offers, we like to, I've made a cover sheet that I have that kind of explains it a little bit, and it gives Chris's info and our closer, Jess Johnson at Davis Brown Law Firm's info. And I find that kind of helps a little bit, but it says this package contains two offers. There's an offer from the buyer to the seller for a real estate contract, and there's an offer from Contract Exchange to buy that contract for face value. So the paperwork is there's just one extra step in there, but it all happens at the same closing table. Davis Brown Law Firm handles the closing and all of these, seller will walk out of there with a check, and that's why I have to drill into listing agents' heads. You want your seller to get all the money from their sale, right? Yeah. Okay. Well, that's what this does. So, and you're having a reputable attorney, doing all the paperwork and closing the deal. So, what's the problem?
Unfamiliar.
Yeah, I've had plenty of agents, Iowa agents, say they don't want to do a contract. They don't want to do it. I had one a couple years ago, and she kept going back. There was a church involved. So there was a lot of people to talk to, and everybody had an opinion. So she kept going back to the church, and they went to the council of elders, and they said, we don't want a contract. And this kept going around and around. And I go, do you want the money, right? And they said, yeah. Okay, well, that's what this is going to do. They're going to get the money at the closing table, just like any other sale, and eventually it came down to, I go, well, here's Davis, Jess Johnson's info, Davis Brown's closing it. And eventually she called me back and goes, well, I talked to my manager, and they said, because Davis Brown is doing all the paperwork and doing the closing, he said it must be good. So we can do it. I go, okay, fine.
So that being said, you should treat your buyer in these situations like they're any other buyer, and a seller may try to say, okay, if I'm doing it, even if it's not a convention, not working with us, and you're like, okay, let's make a contract offer on this home. The seller may try to take control and be like, no, I'm not gonna give a tax expiration, I don't want these title work or a home warranty or anything like that. There's no reason you can't do it. There's no reason you can't ask for it. You may just say no, but there's no reason to not put it in an offer, especially on the conventional contract program.
In that situation, do you guys have an appraisal done?
Yes.
Okay, so that's how you would kind of approve the house along with the contract stuff?
Along with, and a home inspection.
The payment that you guys structure with the buyer, does that include insurance and taxes?
Yep.
And you guys show them that you pay it when it comes due?
Yep, absolutely.
Make sure that, they're not.
Right, yeah, so that, we track all that. Each account at Contract Exchange has an escrow account, and there's own separate accounting for that, and paying their taxes, paying their insurance, and keep making sure that the buyer is keeping insurance on the property, and that those things are paid. That's kind of what we're doing and watching for. That's actually another part of your ATR. You have to evaluate all the costs that go along with the house, not just your principal and interest portion, but also what are the real estate taxes, what are the, what's the homeowner's insurance gonna cost. Okay, so just give you a brief example here, RE/MAX purchase agreement here. This part looks just the same. John Q. Public, the seller, Jane Contract is gonna buy it for $100,000. We do check 2 of these boxes: assumption of mortgage or contract sale, and other financing terms. Ask seller to pay $3,000 of buyer's closing costs, prepaids, and origination. Again, that's not going to make or break our involvement in the deal. It's just it's good to help the buyer in terms of getting, you guys know, it helps keep things, because we're already putting up 20% down. Just helps keep things right near that 20%. So then I had to cross out agent related to buyer. Tony treats everybody like family, so it's he's just got that built into his purchase agreement. But this is the language that's actually going to protect the seller in this situation, make them feel at ease. Is subject to the sale of the contract to Contract Exchange Corporation, assignment of deed at closing, seller to receive all their proceeds as part of traditional real estate transaction. Terms for financing addendum to be determined by Contract Exchange after price and other conditions are agreed to. So there is a financing addendum, which you may or may not have experience with in terms of, putting the purchase agreement together. But it's, when you're haggling back and forth on price, it's too cumbersome to actually keep changing that financing addendum.
Does the buyer at that point know what interest rate you're charging them?
Yeah,
It's not
'cause
gonna move and-
By that point in time, I've already interviewed them. I've run their credit. I've, said, yes, you're pre-approved.
So that's in stone for a little while anyway.
Right, exactly. And so that's, it kind of just saves you guys the hassle of trying to fill out a financing addendum and then keep changing it as you guys are going countering back and forth. So you just get your price, get your other contingencies figured out, just like you normally would. And then we'll come through and back clean up on the financing addendum. So this is your financing addendum. Pretty typical information. Want to point something out, which seems to happen quite frequently, is and I don't know why they set this up this way, but the first option on this financing addendum says assumption of mortgage or contract. That is not what you want to choose. No. Bad. That is an assumption of a pre-existing obligation. So that is the buyer taking over the seller's mortgage or contract, not assumption of mortgage or contract. So that gets even more
I
confusing.
think it's because in the purchase agreement, that's the box you check to send you to this.
Right, because it says assumption of mortgage or
and then you're
contract
like,
or
oh, yeah,
contract
that's what I
sale.
checked before.
Right,
So
yeah.
It's,
So yeah, we want to do the second one, contract, just straight contract. And then buyers and sellers will execute a real estate installment contract balance due of $90,000. So your first box on this page is the balance after the down payment.
That's what everyone is up. They want to put their purchase price in there. That's the balance.
Right. And, I'll be, if you're working with contract exchange, I'll be giving all these numbers to you anyway and saying, okay, this is what it's gonna be. Monthly payments is $694.63 at 8%, and then your down payment goes in that second line there. The balance of the purchase price, $10,000, is to be paid in cash at the time of close. So that's their down. Then you have some additional boxes here that are gonna, change depending on what type of transaction you're working with. But in transactions with contract exchange, oftentimes this shall not have a balloon. So for consumers who have 20% down and who qualify for this program, there are no balloons with contract sales with contract exchange anymore. We're providing fixed rate financing for 15, 20, 25 years, even 30 in a few cases. This contract shall allow buyers to prepay all or any of the principal without penalty. We're not trying to make it harder for them to pay off. This contract shall be due and payable in full upon sale or assignment by the buyer, so they can't sell the property without paying off the contract. Contract shall require 1/12 the annual insurance premium to be paid to the seller with monthly payment into an escrow fund.
So that payment up there that's reflected is not included in one.
Right.
That's just the loan, yeah.
That's just the one.
That's just the money.
If you're requiring 20% down on $100,000 purchase, why is there only $10,000 down?
It is just an example, but yeah, I mean,
Math is wrong.
Ooh, gotcha.
Very
We
observant.
gotcha.
It should say 80,000 and 20,000.
well, okay, no, the math is, okay, all right.
Come on,
This
Fred.
guy.
No, that would have made that note.
Advertising it at 8%. Yeah. Okay, so this is a situation that you may run across where contract exchange is not involved. It's, 100,000, 10,000 down.
It's just an example, guys.
Okay, other section, taxes. You're gonna run into different situations. In the conventional contract program, like going back to it, same, like normal, any other transaction, get that tax proration. There's no reason that you shouldn't have it. The seller's getting all their money. They're taking no hit for doing this.
In a normal contract where the seller is gonna hold that contract, it's not typical that that seller gives a tax proration back to the buyer. But in this conventional contract case where the seller is not gonna be holding that contract anymore, we try and get as much money out of them as possible. I mean, we're trying to get the full commission, we're trying to get a full tax proration, we're asking for 3,000 closing costs. This just pads that buyer's escrow account. If you're working for the buyer, check the third box so that they get that full tax proration. But if you're working for the seller and that seller intends on holding the contract, check the first box. Is that the one where they say that?
Is crediting such taxes.
No, fourth box, no proration of taxes shall.
Right.
So there's no reason if the seller's holding the contract for this buyer to give him money and then the seller give him money back, doesn't really make sense. But in this case where the seller's not ending up with that contract, let's get all that money and put it in the buyer's escrow account.
Or against their closing costs.
Yeah.
Well, the seller's being removed
Yeah.
from the property.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
That being said, there are countless times that we run across a situation where someone has sold a property on contract. There's an escrow for taxes, and and they want to sell us a contract. We go, okay, great, yeah, okay. So how much money's in the escrow account? And the seller goes, oh, nothing. And it's like, well, it must be something. But it's because they're just treating it in their minds like a pass-through, like they don't actually ever change what the buyer's paying them per month. They're not keeping track if that matches up with what the actual tax bill is. So we just had a situation where we looked at some accounts and took them over where the escrow accounts have been running negative for years. And had not been, because they didn't start out correctly. If you just start out with nothing in your escrow account, chances are then it's going to go negative or not work itself out correctly. So even if you do check the fourth box, it's important to think about, is there something that the seller is going to give
Yeah,
to
what
the
do we
buyer?
need in that account by the next
Tax
tax
payment.
pay installment is how I usually work it. So if you're closing in March, you know, even though the taxes were just paid, you're gonna say seller to pay March taxes, plus 1 month because correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, because your payment's not gonna start till the buyer's payment's not gonna start till the next month. So they'll need 6 payments worth of taxes in that escrow account by the time they get to September. You know, so you just want to think a little bit ahead. They're gonna pay a little bit of a proration if you do it that way. But you just want to make sure they're gonna have that money so the seller can pay the taxes when they come due.
Which is another reason that, you know, to have contract exchange involved.
Moral of this whole thing is just let us do all this. We can close it, end of show. Let's get
Okay, a couple examples of Park Avenue in Des Moines. This is Tony's buyer, actually.
Yeah. This is a lady came to us for financing. She was like, I wanted to buy one of your houses. And she kind of looked at what we had. She had 20% down. And she goes, I like this house over here. You know, it's on this street, the same street she lived on, you know, that she was renting on. Her neighbors lived there, her friends lived there and whatnot. So she goes, can I just buy this one? And we go, with 20% down, you can. We got her approved. And so, yeah, it was listed 79.9. We approved her, accepted offer 78.9, 3,000 closing costs. And then we ended up with the contract,
Yeah.
you know.
Seller pays all their normal expenses, people get their commissions, it's a happy time. Here's one that we did in Cedar Rapids. This one was interesting. It was listed at 139.9, accepted offer at 137. This guy, not even sure what he was approved for, but it was apparently like 11% loan. And lo and behold, it fell through, but he was putting 20% down. Luckily, the listing agent in this circumstance, not even the buyer's agent, because he had worked with us before, remembers us and he calls me up and goes, hey, Chris, this sounds like exactly like what you would do. And will you take a look at this? So he held his deal together, didn't have to go back and start from scratch. I came in, got the buyer qualified, no difference to the seller. We just stepped into that lender's role and completed the transaction.
You guys saved my butt once too, right here, there it is.
This is it? This is it? No, this is a good one.
Well, tell us about it.
I will, I'll tell you about it. This is my aunt and uncle's home. They built this house and they're 85 years old. They bought a townhome, Jerry's townhome. And an agent, KW agent, brought us a good buyer. And I can't remember why the buyer didn't get qualified, but this was like right around Christmas time, into the snow. And she was the buyer's agent, the one that procured Tony. And then Tony, I trust Tony. I didn't really understand what was going on, but I trust Tony. So Tony told hey, this is what we can do, and we'll get this happening. And he had already bought the townhome. So here I am, right around Christmas, going to tell my uncle, hey, by the way, your deal's going to fall through.
How long was it? Because maybe you can check my facts on this. Because was that deal in the making for several months that it had taken?
Yeah, it was probably, at least probably 45 to 60 days.
Okay.
I can't remember why it fell through, but it fell through, and the buyer was strong. And long story short, you guys came in, did exactly what you guys said, and my uncle grabbed all his money and it was saved my ass. Really.
Yeah, we closed it pretty quick too, if I remember.
Yeah, it was 2 or 3 weeks. I think we only were about 4 or 5 days over our original.
Oh, that's good, because I thought it'd been going on a lot longer. That's what thanks for checking my facts on that one. But the Wells Fargo was the original lender, I believe, and they got.
By the way, I will add this. This is the only time. The reason why they closed on the Jerry's home is because Wells Fargo gave us a full commitment on the buyer. It was the first time anybody's
Wow.
Because I said, hey, we won't close on this new townhome if you can't provide a full commitment. And they provided one, and it's the first time I've ever had a full commitment in 23 years where they didn't fall through, right? Fell through.
Jeez. Yeah, so that was bizarre. And it was, there was a lot there that to kind of pull together. So I guess I'm surprised Wells Fargo issued a full commitment. What I'm saying. Yeah, exactly happened that way. Came in and put that deal together.
Yeah, I appreciate that. Thanks, guys.
No problem. So then originating contracts, we talked about this service the whole time. Fee-based service charges to sellers to verify important buyer information, employment, income, credit, underwriting ratios, all those things we already talked about. Seller can rest assured that they are in compliance with the ability to repay rule. Servicing or sale to contract exchange corporation is required in order, that we're making sure that we're following all our laws and about servicing and ongoing buyer contact and delinquency and everything that goes along with servicing a note. So right now we are charging $1,000 to do this on a transaction. So $1,000, and then in addition, you get this service, you get a file, you get somebody who the buyers are dealing with as well for their loan through you as the seller. It's a huge benefit. And so that the seller isn't taking calls, your realtor isn't taking calls about this buyer's thing and that buyer's thing, or do they have insurance? I'm kind of in there as well going, hey, let's make sure that everything gets done properly.
That's a huge value to your sellers. If there's going, oh, I'll just have my attorney do it. It's like, well, is your attorney a licensed mortgage loan originator? Because probably not,
So yeah, it is just a good peace of mind service to have in your back pocket so that your sellers can sell on contract or with peace of mind. So then servicing contracts, collection of payments, managing of the taxes and the insurance escrows, making sure that those are paid on time without penalty. That is what we do primarily there in Cedar Rapids with our staff there. Like we said in the beginning, there's over 500 accounts that make their payments to Contract Exchange every month. So it's a lot to keep track of in terms of mortgage, making sure they get their mortgage interest statements for reporting mortgage interest earned to sellers, delinquency contacts, so making sure that buyers being contacted get their late letters and are afforded all of the appropriate protections that they deserve, just like a mortgage borrower would, even if the end result is going to be a forfeiture rather than a foreclosure. Again, reiterating, Iowa Code 535B says no more than 4 to be serviced. So that's something to think about if you're working with a seller who is, ripping them off and is servicing, hey, like 20, 25 contracts. It might be good to say, hey, maybe you should give these guys a call, and there could be some good benefit to you in terms of liability protection and just organizing the whole dang thing.
It's way easier. This is way easier to let them do it. I had a rental last year that I flipped into a contract sale, and I was like, oh, thank God. I don't have to text that buyer anymore, set up time to meet him, to get my payment. I get a check every month in my mailbox. That's all I have to do. Thank you.
You're welcome, Tony.
Yeah.
Helps your sellers, protects your buyers. Servicing is a good thing. It is a different experience for a lot of that would normally be associated with a contract sale. For a buyer to be able to call a number 9 to 5 and get a person who answers and say, what do I owe on my account? What was the last payment that you processed? What day? What was the check number? How much is in my escrow account? How are we going to get this? I'm a little bit behind, but what can we do to get it back, it caught up? I'm going to change insurance. These kinds of things. It allows them to be, think of themselves more as homeowners because that is what they are. Okay, so this is a program that is like the conventional contract program. Differs only in that the seller does not receive all of their money. This happens because we like to say every contract has a price. This is for buyers that have less than 20% down, so maybe they only got 10% or 5% down. They can't come up with the 20. So motivated seller with wiggle room on price, they can, they just need to make it happen.
This is one that I did a couple of years back. I call these houses grandma houses, a lot of them like estates that they just smell kind of like old people were living there, and they're well maintained and just everything's kind of dated. There's nothing wrong with the house. They're solid. They're square houses. They're too pricey for an investor to buy, but too cheap, and maybe not as good as like an FHA house would be, or not good enough for more traditional buyers. It's kind of a gap. And a couple of years ago, this was 50, 60,000. Right now, it's probably 70, 80,000 is where this gap is. But I think it's a really good gap for contract buyers because, an investor, how this happened was is a agent that I had dealt with before in the past, an Iowa agent who was actually halfway intelligent. And I made an offer to him and he says, well, I'll give you their bottom dollar. They can't take any more than or less than X. He's got a loan. We've calculated all this out. I just know. And I go, okay, well, don't reduce the price anymore. I think they were like at 50 or 52. And I said, don't reduce the price anymore. I think we can find a contract buyer to buy this thing and get your sellers out. Because where it was priced was fine for a owner occupant to go in there. It's like 55,000. There's nothing else on the market for 55 that was square, solid, and fairly well maintained. So it took us a while, but we did find, I got a contract buyer that had 5,000 down or 6,000 down, whatever is 10%, I think. And we got them approved, and I took them over to this house. I go, you want a cheap house? This is the best we can do. So I don't know, is there another slide that kind of lays out the numbers?
Yep.
Okay. This is where we presented two offers simultaneously. The buyer to seller, 58,000, sell price 5,000 down, 15-year fix. And then at the end of that offer with the disclosures and everything else, there was a contract exchange offer to the seller to buy that contract for $40,500. And that was basically their bottom dollar. So the seller got 5,000 down plus 40,500. They got 45,500 less expenses, commission, tax proration, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. Had them closed at Davis Brown Law Firm. The listing agent was able to walk out with proceeds check, commission check, and everything. And we sat there with the buyer and did their closing as well. The seller is completely out of that. They did take a discount. They had 58,000 with 5,000 down.
It's like a $13,000 discount.
Yeah, they gave up 10 grand or so, but they're out of the property. They don't own it. They don't owe anything against it anymore. The buyer cannot come back on them for anything. We hold the contract with the buyer. They owe us the money. They get the cash. They're out. They're gone. Nothing.
So it's.
The buyer's happy, he's got a good house, a solid house, paint and carpet, he's got a good property, just a little fix up and he's got something else.
Right, that's a good point that, this is a good situations for buyers to build sweat equity instead of cash equity on the beginning. Because it's going to be more like those types of properties like Tony's talking about, that 70, maybe even a $90,000 gap right now, that we think that those properties could be sitting in. It's a good way to potentially mobilize listings and get properties on the market if you know that you can do this, because you'll run across someone who needs to sell, but
they don't have money to fix it up anymore.
Right, they don't have money to fix it up anymore, and it's going to take just somebody getting in there and building some sweat equity, but it's also too cheap, because if you can afford a $70,000 loan right now, you can afford an $80,000 loan. that gap does exist for buyers,
And while we do an appraisal on these, we do appraisal on these ones, right?
Mhm.
Yeah. We don't do an FHA appraisal. So where they may say, yeah, but we're giving up 10 grand or something. And you go, yeah, but there's no FHA appraisal. You're not gonna be required to do additional repairs. You're out of the sale, you're done, you know?
So then just kind of as a visual demonstration of how this works and how it compares to a conventional contract, this 100%, that's your seller's money received out of the transaction as gross proceeds of the purchase price. Conventional contract, you get the 100%. And the seller paid discount, there is that seller discount, they do have to give up an additional XYZ or some amount based on the terms of the contract, the down payment of the contract, to get the transaction done with and out of the property. Okay, so we're going to talk briefly about refinancing contracts. This kind of touches on all the same themes. You see a lot of stuff where people have balloons, 3-year balloons, because I only need 3 years to refinance, and then 6 years down the line, 9 years down the line, they still haven't paid off, and they still need a contract, and the seller needs to get out, but needs all their money. This is, it would look the exact same to the seller in this situation as if any other lender had refinanced them. We do charge a 2% origination fee to the buyer. Fixed rate, we can remove balloons and that kind of thing. If they've got a balloon hanging over their head, we can, get them into a more secure, basically secure the future. And then they have fair and accurate accounting to account for the buyers moving forward. And Tony Sr. touched on this a little earlier on late fees and kind of how some sellers treat late fees. And a lot of them are doing it illegally. Like I had a guy who I took over servicing for, and he goes, no, my contract says they have to pay the late fee first. And that means that payment is gonna be late. And I kept going around and around with him. And I'm like, I can't tell if we're talking about the same thing or you're asking me to do something illegal. And it turns out he was asking me to do something illegal, which is, it's called pyramiding of late fees. And so that is when, because you don't pay a late, so say you pay your April payment late and it accrues a late fee. But you don't pay the late fee. Then in May, when you make your payment, what they claim to do is take a piece of that May payment and apply it to the old late fee. So then the entire May payment isn't paid, so that it's late. And it just creates an endless chain of late fees all the way down the line because they never paid the one late fee. So this is something that you see in contracts, by people who aren't having them serviced by a professional and following all the laws and making sure people aren't getting, taken to the cleaners. So, computer record keeping is important to buyers. Being able to get those reports and see, what do I owe? How have payments been applied? Here's an example of a house we did in Anamosa. This one was fun. These are great folks. They've been in this contract for 14 years. And it had originally started with a 3-year balloon. And there was basically a big asbestos problem with this house in the insulation or something like that. And it got all wet because of Hurricane Katrina storm had come up and rained on. I'm serious. And they had to redo the entire house. They added on to it. They had spent tons of money on this property over 14 years, and the balloon had been extended, over and over and over and over again. But the problem was the seller was the wife's employer. So not a great situation to be in where you owe your employer money for your house. They didn't know what to do. They were going to sell their property and buy it back for like $100,000 more. there are people out there that purport to do this type of thing. We'll say, okay, yeah, I'll sell it back to you on contract. We'll just mark it up 50 grand. We can't do that. You know, that's what you're limited to is that origination fee, and that's we only get our 2% out of the deal. But we are able to preserve their equity, remove the balloon, pay them off in full. Now you have a much better relationship with your employer. And I'm serious on this. The asbestos thing was interesting when we actually ran an environmental report. It was like, oh, there was an incident, and it was right on top of that house. And we're like, what? Okay, that's all we have for now. Anybody have any questions off the bat? Yeah.
Maybe, so when you guys talk about refinancing, so let's say you got a couple of homeowners, they're married, they're getting divorced, husband wants to stay there, but the credit's not that, or not good enough to be able to get refinance her off the mortgage on his own with a traditional lender.
Right.
Would that be something that you guys would look at in that situation?
Yep, absolutely. That would be a good avenue for that. You have something you want to tell us? No, absolutely. That's one of the reasons why we exist here, is to kind of get, is to fix these situations, refinance and get to. No, if they want to borrow money on it, then just refinance. So that's some, yeah, exactly. No down payment necessary in those circumstances. And if you want to, people who have free and clear property, who don't have great credit, but need to borrow some money and do some fix up, that's another situation where we can lend money to these people and get these properties improved and that kind of thing. Yeah.
So as a seller, you've relinquished all your rights to that property once it's under contract then?
Yes.
Not technically all your rights.
Right. I mean, you remain the title holder, so then but you can't sell it ever again as long as that contract is in place. The only person who can sell it is the contract buyer. So that to the real estate, you no longer own the real estate. What you have is this, you remain the title holder in this vendor interest.
So a follow-up question then from there is, so what if the buyer goes into like a foreclosure position, not making the payments, and is that contract is changed, foreclosed on that buyer then?
You can foreclose you can foreclose a contract. 99.5% of the time, we're going to do a forfeiture because it's much faster. We believe it's a stabilizing force in some areas where contracts are prevalent because we can get control of the property faster. They're not sitting around for 3 years while a foreclosure process drags on. And, you know, the property is being wrecked quicker. So, but you can foreclose a contract and take it all the way to sheriff's sale though.
So at that time, the property is actually reversed back to the previous seller then?
Correct. So that's what a forfeiture is saying. A forfeiture is saying, okay, you don't get any of your payments anymore, or all the payments that your down payment, all that's gone. I get the property back, but I can never come back on you for what you owed me. So there can never be any kind of deficiency judgment or small claims amount for these payments that were missed. The forfeiture is saying, I give up the right to the payments that you missed, but I get the property back.
As far as rights to the property are concerned, there is some language in the contract, in the bar form contract, that if they're like letting the property go to pot, like if the roof is leaking and they're not doing anything about it, you can do the roof and put it on their balance.
Right.
So that's a way to protect your property, I guess.
Yeah, you always have the ability.
Maybe they're making their payments, they just can't afford it, you know, and that's something that we've done for buyers a lot too, is they call us and go, oh, my sewer just caved in or whatever, and we're like, oh man, that sucks. Can you fix it? You know? They're like, no, I have no money, you know, so done the sewer for them. They pay perfectly, they just don't have $7,000 to dump into it. So, we'll do the sewer for them, add it back to their balance and keep them in there.
Is that something you gotta add a writer to the contract, something that's signed, or is that?
It's in
No,
there.
it's
Yeah,
in there
it's in
under
there.
care of the
Protect your
property.
Do you guys inspect the properties that you got, like a yearly thing, a quarterly?
Yeah,
thing?
That's
that's
my inspector.
Yeah, there is something on the books right now with City of Des Moines. So you may have heard about this, and during the bus-in day, it was talked about a little bit. But right now, the City of Des Moines recently passed an ordinance, and for the past 10 years, they've had an ordinance in place saying that you have to have the properties, a contract sale inspected, and that buyer has to have that inspection 2 weeks prior to the execution of the contract. The new ordinance said that they have to have it inspected. It has to be notarized, signed by the buyer, and filed with the City of Des Moines. And then this City of Des Moines, like kind of a rental inspector kind of guy, they hired 2 new guys to do this program, will go out to that property and take a look at it and then require any additional repairs to be done to it.
Is that on the buyer's expense at that point?
Yeah, that's on the seller's expense. at
Yeah,
this
the way
point.
that ordinance.
The way
reads.
it's written, it goes back on the seller. And you can even close it, and if 30 days pass, nobody fixed that stuff, the city's coming back to the seller for that stuff.
So just so I'm clear on this, you guys sell property on contract, buyer's paying the way you guys laid it out. 2 years, you got your city through there, everything passed the first time. 2 years later, let's say the rental certificate is expired, they got to go back through.
It's not a rental certificate.
Well,
in
but
that
it's the
case.
equivalent.
It's a point of sale.
Yeah,
It's
that's
just
a
one
point of
time.
sale ordinance. They don't care after the sale.
They don't
Right.
care after you
No,
got.
there's no
Sure.
renewal period for the
Gotcha,
contract
that's what I was
sale.
getting at. There's no renewal period.
No.
That's what I was getting to it. Okay.
Now, what that bus-in day was so awesome that we, went all down to the Capitol, and the thing that they were proposing, or that was proposed, and it has passed now, is that no city or local government can require inspections at the point of sale. And it's really just bounces city and local governments out of the transactions. Newton had some ordinance where they had the termite inspector had to check the sump pump. It's kind of silly, but it is already been signed by the governor, and that ordinance is getting bounced out. So
Nice.
now till, I think the effective date is July
I
1st.
think it's July 1st, yeah. So
So,
that.
but
those
from
two
now
city
until
ordinances
then,
are no longer in effect.
if you're doing a
No.
contract sale, it has to go through that inspection process. We've not pushed back on the city and said, well, July 1st it's out, so you're out and you're done. And I don't know what the city's gonna try and do after July 1st, if they're gonna, the way it's written, they can't even go back to their old system where we had to file an inspection with them. They're basically out on their dime. But I don't know what they're gonna try and do, and we do have till that July 1st is when it goes into effect, so anything done till that.
Lance was working on this in the Capitol, and the realtors, what is it called? The
RPAC, Realtor Political Action.
The Realtor Political Action Committee really got this done for us. So we thank them and, support them, because cities all over Iowa were throwing up roadblocks and, different things, Muscatine had a sump pump inspection, and all, so it was just mucking up the works. We heard there might have been 20 cities that had inspectors inspecting things for real estate sales. And now that is all gone. The legislature said, no, cities, you're not involved in real estate transfers.
And that was just the first step. If that would have passed, it would have got into our
That's
regular
what,
sales.
yeah, and we're like,
Yeah,
well,
they were gunning for regular sales.
yeah, they mentioned that.
And there's other cities and states that do that,
Yep,
correct?
St. Paul,
St. Paul, yeah,
St.
right.
Paul, Minneapolis do it. They
So-
require inspections for all sales.
So if anybody that has rentals
California.
that had the city of Des Moines come through, you would not want them coming through on every single sale you have.
Yeah.
And requiring your seller to fix these things prior to, it's a good thing it did not pass.
It was adding probably, we feel like, I don't know, 5,000 or more.
It was about 5,000 a sale that we had seen, and it's still out there, but God, it sucked up a lot of oxygen for our
It was
company and for our
ridiculous.
business,
It was- it was-
just to kind of deal with this program, Yeah.
So as a listing agent, is there on your listing, would you check off and you got normal FBA,
Yes,
FHA,
and that's,
cash,
yeah, I pull
conventional?
that to
Is
every
there a
agent.
check for?
Check contract on every listing that you list. I mean, because if you, as long as you think it's feasible, that you can come up with someone come up with 20% down, and we've seen it on, $300,000, $400,000 houses. So why not? Why not open yourself up to that? And you can just put on the agent remarks, contract with 20% down, 3,000 closing costs.
Yeah, with contract exchange.
Pre-approved
Yeah,
contract
you
exchange.
must get pre-approved with contract exchange. Doesn't hurt you. It helps expose your listing to more buyers out there. There's plenty of buyers out there. I got 50,000 down, 60,000 down, wouldn't think of it, but they're out there.
And you'd be surprised, there's a lot of contracts even out in the burbs and stuff and out here, and people who want to live out here and want to buy a house out here, who may need non-traditional financing. It isn't just the city of Des Moines, we got to inspect these rundown houses type of thing. It's everywhere.
It's not even just, buyers that are bad credit. Some of them
Right.
make a lot of money, but for whatever reason, they're self-employed and don't claim
Right.
a lot of money on their taxes. But they have they do well and they make a lot of money, and
That's my question.
there are those people out there.
A lot of bartender friends.
Sure.
Just crap tons of money.
Sure.
They might keep track, they might not, but how do you approve them? They have pay cash for everything, they have no credit. What do I tell them? I have a lot of friends like that in that position.
So the key that I tell these people, this was actually kind of a situation on that Virginia Avenue with the deal that fell through where Wells Fargo was a lender. And that I actually point to that deal as like the prime example of what someone should do. Is I look for a tax return, I take it into account. What they should be doing is keeping track. And they should be saying, tonight I took home X amount of dollars, I kept this much cash, and I deposited this much cash. Or better even yet, deposit all the cash into a bank account and then use it, so that we can use bank records or some other third-party records to show the income coming in. Because, I use kind of like a constellation approach. Like I say, okay, here are these bank records, these are what the payment stubs are saying, she's been on the job for this long. Kind of to piece together that picture and justify and say, yes, this person makes this much money. So it's the keeping track of it. And on that Virginia Avenue closing, that guy actually did some of the best work in terms of this invoice got paid this much, took this much cash, or deposited this much cash from the check and withdrew this much, and had the receipt too. So it was just like I had 4 or 5 months of that, and I was like, okay, perfect. That's good enough for us, and that's how we got that deal done. So willy-nilly just using the cash and keeping it in your pocket and not tracking it anywhere, that's gonna leave you some and stuck there.
Daniel, approve people that are self-employed for like less than 2 years?
Yeah, it depends on the 2-year thing. I don't like under a year. I definitely like over a year, if possible 18 months. A lot of it depends, and I kind of have this concept called, a lot of the time when you see someone who's self-employed, what they are is they're really self-employed labor. They're not, it's not like they are renting space, have to keep an inventory and sell widgets out the door every month and run a business. They are really just organizing labor and just selling their labor as a 1099 worker. The gig economy is, what they talk about anymore. And if that person has been, let's say a drywall contractor, subcontractor, been in business, he's been doing drywall for 10 years, and for the last 4, he's been working for Ray's Drywall or whatever, and then now he's on his own. He started his own business. But guess where all his business is coming from? The business that he just left as a W-2 employee. Okay, well then in those situations, no, I'm not gonna try and require him to have 2 years in business doing that when all he's really
Or
doing
if
is
he's
just.
got a contract with Jerry's Homes saying, oh, we're gonna have it, if he can have somebody say, we're gonna give him a ton of drywall business. Cause we know this dude, and he's been in the business for years. We did that with the plumber in Cedar Rapids, new in business, and we approved him.
Oh, that's, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
he's been
exactly.
10 years a plumber. He knew all these guys, and he
HVAC,
showed
yeah.
us a couple of contracts from some builders or something saying.
No, it was the surrounding school district, so he was
Oh, the
actually,
school district.
it was
Okay.
not the Cedar Rapids School District, but the surrounding school district. He worked for a mechanical contractor, in town. There was some kind of disagreement. He was their lead guy on all these, Vinton schools and all these little towns around Cedar Rapids schools. And so he just goes, well, start my own business. You guys want to come? And they all just moved to him away from his old employer. He came in and showed us those contracts and these invoices. He only been in business 6 months. So I kind of used that amount of income as, I try to build in some conservative approaches to make sure I'm not just, oh, that he made this much in 3 months, that means he'll make this much in 12. I try to be conservative with
But the buck does stop with you guys. You guys take the information, try to make sense of it, and if it makes sense to you guys, you don't have to send it up anywhere else.
Right, so
So-
we
The
approve.
point is,
Any
we're not
underwriting,
treated as a
so,
bank.
No,
We're
we
not
approve
treated
right here.
This is the guy right here.
Yeah,
Right,
send,
this is the one right
send
here.
senior some.
Cup of
Yeah,
coffee.
that's our
I
underwriting.
mean,
Yeah, buck beer. A good bottle of his
When
favorite.
you're looking at the ability to repay, what do you look at for credit? Since that does come up a lot with people not being able to do traditional financing.
Sure. So I do use a lot of the same approaches that a normal lender might, how they might treat things. Collections, if they're, in the last 2 or 3 years, I do 1% of the balance. As a monthly payment, 1% of student loan balances, if they're not being paid on, or, I do look, primarily people are on income-based repayment a lot of the time. That does work. And then, charged off auto from 3 years ago, I don't really, that doesn't matter. I mean, I guess
Kind of case by case.
it's a case by case thing. And what I generally am looking for is the sheer amount of the situation that's before them. If they've got, $50,000 in charged off credit cards, lost cars, got collections, bounce checks.
Sub 500.
Yeah,
We've been
like,
doing this long as we see one guy on paper, you go, that guy's a train wreck, and it's never, he doesn't pay anybody, But we also talk to him too, and some things can be overcome with down payment or interest rate. If you're like, hey, we went through a divorce, or I got sick, and that's where everything kind of hit the fan, and we just haven't been able to catch up. We've got ourselves in a bad way, but we're trying to restart, and blah, blah, blah. And we're like, well, it sounds like it makes sense, we have to charge you a little bit more on the rate.
Yeah, so if we see it, there's an illness, bunch of medical collections, and now they're back at work, we're not gonna hold that against them, we're gonna say, okay, looks like you're back on your feet, so we'll make the loan.
Yeah, that's where time on the job and that kind of, and like residency permanence, these kinds of things that are just a little bit perfunctory and normal, lending transactions. Where it's like, where have you been for the last 2 years? Where did you live? Or where have you worked? Somebody who's been on their job for, 15 years, that carries a lot of weight with us. It shows stability, that they can, at least hold things together if they've stayed in the same place for multiple years. Those things that show stability mean a lot to us in those situations.
I have a general statement. So all great stuff. This is a plug for them actually. So for those of you who want to dabble and get into contract stuff, they're a great resource. Even if you don't turn it away. Get them to Tony and he'll take care of it. And then maybe it could be 2 months, 18 months down the road, you're gonna randomly get a commission referral and be like, what was that for? And it's from the work that they did. So it's happened a few times, been pretty nice and painless. So on that note, they brought everyone pizza, so that's in here. If you want the CE credits, you have to be here till 12:10 and then sign out at the front counter. So I'm sure they'd be happy to answer questions for after or here while you enjoy your pizza.
And just a reminder too, we don't have any training next Wednesday, but the workshops are gonna start the following Wednesday, so the 18th. We'll be sending out more information on that, but it'll be Facebook business pages, website content, kind of all different kinds of workshops like that.
Can you find a statement, Sheldon?
Well, we got cards to hand out or?
Yeah, sure, no, we'll be around. Thanks for giving us the opportunity, guys. It's really great to get out here and let people know that we exist, because that's one of the biggest things we hear all the time is, you know, we're getting towards the end of the deal or something like, I had no idea this was even possible. And we're like, yeah, well, we're here.
And you refer people to us, they're gonna be treated well, and, they'll thank you for referring, I think they will, really, because we try to treat everybody right.
Thank you guys.
Pizza's in there and donuts still.
How about you? Good, how are you?
If you got any questions, just call us, you know.
Oh, you can take that break. I'm just gonna, no, you don't need to. The only thing is that.
That's a good spot.
Yeah, it starts at 12, right?